political dynasties, baka mas fewer elections para sa mga mamamayang Pilipino and longer periods of office for them. So yun yung pinapangambahan namin. And ang nakikita namin dito ay mukhang hindi talaga siya advantageous sa mga mamamayan. Yun lamang po, maraming salamat.
Thank you, Jan Bell. Now we'll hear from Attorney Howard Calleja.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, Mr. Chairman. Correction lang po, kanina was said as the lawyer of PPCRV. Former lawyer na po ngayon. But now I am also submitting our position paper as part of Isang Bayan. So on your email, we have submitted our position paper. It's quite lengthy, but I will just give the conclusion and some salient points to it so that we can have more time for discussion later on. So simple lang po ang stand po ng Isang Bayan. We cannot abuse our constitution to violate our constitution. The problems of our constitution, the problems of our country is not the cause or did not come from the constitution. We cannot blame our constitution from where we are at this point in time. Although the 1987 constitution is nowhere stagnant or perfect, revising the constitution at this time should not be taken lightly for the wrong reasons or that merely intertwined with bureaucracy. It is for this reason that if the reason is merely for unemployment, then we should set our attention to create more jobs and make education more accessible. If the reason is poverty, then we have to create local policies that will alleviate the poor. If the reason is inflation, then we have to create spaces for our new raw materials to flourish. Taking all these reasons together, the House proposals is nothing but a shift of attention of our economic problems to a constitutional revision. Problems in bureaucracy and political issues cannot be addressed by revising the Constitution. However, if the Congress or the House will proceed with revising the Constitution, we propose that such mode, already stated a while ago, be done by a constitutional convention. And if there would be a constitutional convention, we thus propose that relatives of the fourth degree, this is to safeguard any political dynasty or any self-serving interest, we propose that relatives of up to the fourth civil degree of consanguinity or affinity of incumbent congressmen, senators, president, vice president should be disqualified to be a delegate of the CONCON. Furthermore, any incumbent elected official is deemed automatically resigned from his or her position upon him filing the candidate for a CONCON position. If on the other hand, there would be a constitutional assembly, but of course, as I said, our preference is a constitutional convention. If it is a constitutional assembly, then we deem that delegates or congressmen shall be disqualified to run or hold off any public office within 5 years from effectivity of the amendment of the Constitution. This po is parang safeguards for any interior motives. But then again, finally, meron din pong statement on the amendment or the proposed provisions or provisions to be amended. We are of the opinion that we cannot limit any provisions to be amended once a constitutional convention or constitutional assembly is called, so that any talk of any provision at this point in time would be premature, because once you open a constitutional amendment or convention, then every provision is open for discussion. Yun po, and then we're open for any discussion, and thank you for this opportunity. Salamat po.
Thank you, Attorney Calleja. The next speaker is from the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. Since two guest speakers are here, Dr. Navarro and Dr. Camara are going to share the 10-minute.
Just me.
Just Dr. Navarro, okay.
Yes.
You're acknowledged.
Thank you and good afternoon, honorable members of this committee. PIDS President Dr. Aniceto Orbeta sends his apologies. He has a meeting. And before everything else, allow me to explain that we have a usual disclaimer that views and opinions expressed by the PIDS fellows are those of the fellows themselves, not the institutional position. So that's our usual position. So the letter invitation sent to PIDS asked 3 questions, whether or not it is necessary to amend the Constitution, and if yes, what's the preferable mode, and then what are the proposed specific amendments, to which my brief answers are to the first and third questions, yes, and the economic provisions by inserting unless otherwise provided by law in specific provisions, namely the restrictions on foreign ownership in Articles 12, 14, and 16. And to the second question, through a constitutional convention. So allow me to explain further. It has been well established in the economics literature that foreign direct investments, or FDI, to developing countries bring economic gains that can take the following forms: by allowing the transfer of technology to host countries, particularly technology transfers that cannot be achieved through mere trade in goods and services; by making available to the host country human resources through trainings, business operation techniques, and business ethics that foreign direct investments bring in, thereby contributing to the domestic human capital development. And thirdly, by generating tax revenues for the host country in the form of corporate income taxes and higher revenue tax base due to higher economic activities. It is also well known that in helping foreign equity holders decide where to invest, and in helping countries benchmark themselves against each other, the FDI restrictiveness of countries are being analyzed and monitored by investment advisors, pero often as private proprietary information, and also by multilateral agencies as publicly available information. And in the latest assessment by the OECD of the FDI restrictiveness of 85 countries, 2020 data po yung latest, and the Philippines ranked 3rd most restrictive among 85 countries. And if we are to look at the 10 ASEAN countries, among ASEAN countries, tayo po yung unang pinaka-restrictive. By amending the economic provisions, and specifically by inserting the phrase unless otherwise provided by law, we will have an incremental approach. So hindi naman po immediate, not immediate 100% liberalization. So unless otherwise provided by law involves deep scrutiny per sector. For example, investigate for which sectors there is an urgent need to have a liberalization law, and then liberalize that first, yung sector na yon. And then perhaps last to be enacted can be yung land ownership law, no? So after a deep scrutiny, and we can use history as guide, no? We can learn lessons from history in legislative design, because there are various factors that can be designed in a legislation relaxing foreign equity restrictions. For example, capital requirements, specific technology transfers, equal treatment provisions, or reciprocity requirements na nakita natin in the history of Congress enacting foreign entry requirements. And there are other factors that can influence the attractiveness of a country for inward foreign direct investments. Alam po natin yan in the economics profession. Pero it doesn't mean that by pursuing this, we will not pursue the other reforms. So not to the exclusion of other reforms. So what are those other factors? No, rule of law in the country, or the effectiveness of the legal and judicial framework. Siyempre tuloy-tuloy yung reforms natin dapat dyan. The quality of infrastructure. Siyempre tuloy din dapat ang investment in infrastructure na in the current term ay 5% of GDP yung target natin, no? And of course, the availability and affordability of domestic materials and labor, if links to domestic industries are needed in the FDI that will enter. And lastly, the level of ease of dealing with subnational or LGU level institutions if subnational links are needed when foreign investments come in. So all these need to be pursued. So yung constitutional amendments, not to the exclusion of other reforms. And then lastly, I said the Constitutional Convention for the simple reason that this is likely to ensure a greater chance of success. Trust will be built up in the process, I believe. Trust through more consultations and greater sectoral and geographical representations. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Dr. Navarro. Now we will hear from Attorney Anthony Abad, a professor of International Economic Law at Ateneo de Manila University.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me this opportunity. And I hope you will indulge me for a while. I'll try to keep within the 10 minutes, but this is, I think, a very important topic. It's so important that I think we really have to put our full attention into this. For me, the first order of leadership is always to look into, to review and question the system under which the leadership is exercised. Always have to review, why are you in this leadership position? If it is to take care of your constituents and achieve certain development goals, then you have to always review the very fundamental system under which it works. And if you'll do a study, you'll realize that many of the problems we're now experiencing, poverty, high price of onions, whatever it is, can be traced to the way our constitution has been designed. Now, I'm currently doing a study. I'm involved in a study on the future of the multilateral trading system. And one of the observations is that if you don't also look at the constitutional and political systems that go with the members, let's say, of each member of the WTO, then the system will not work, because you'll suddenly have disruptions like the Ukraine crisis, or problems between China and Taiwan, which can be traced to constitutional and political stability and systems. So it's the most important task of our leadership. The first thing that we have to do is review the Constitution and see if the Constitution, the system, the set of rules can be changed so that we can work better and more resiliently in the multilateral trading system. Of course, the overall objective, the number one objective, is poverty eradication, that there should be no poor people in the Philippines. Vietnam has proven through its system of integrating into the world economy that you can lift 40 million people out of absolute poverty from the 1990s to the present. Perhaps their constitution still needs to be reviewed, but they have revised all their laws to conform to international standards. And that's what we have to do. And that's why you must amend the Constitution. You must review and you must amend the Constitution. The Constitution is not designed for its preamble. It's not designed to achieve the goals of poverty eradication, of equal distribution of wealth. It prevents, there's an opacity in governance. It prevents the participation, the real participation of citizens in the governance process, which is very, which can be solved actually if you were to shift to a parliamentary system. But I would like to also add that that it's not just a parliamentary system, but really to look at your government as a corporation, and that each citizen or resident is actually a shareholder in that corporation. And you don't vote in your leaders by by popularity contests, but really through a more scientific process of getting your managers in place. Because you're hiring managers, you're hiring leaders. So you don't go out and put out a popularity contest and just have the numbers of votes, because the process should also involve citizens in the actual let's say the budgeting process, all of this has to be open, which is what you see in a parliamentary system. There's a question hour, the ministers are present. And if you see, this is the gold standard internationally. So if you look at the WTO members that are most successful economically, is the parliamentary systems. On top of that, why federal? Because we're an archipelago, it doesn't make sense. We're multicultural, multilingual. It doesn't make sense to be unitary. And the unitary system, the presidential system, is actually the American colonial system that has just been transformed, no? It's just been copied. So Quezon, unfortunately, adopted the American colonial system where you have basically a governor general acting as a dictator in Malacanang, centralizing all power in Manila because the objective is to please the colonial power. It is not to allow for the participation of the Indians, the Indios, in actual governance. So if you think about it, we are not designed to have citizen participation. We elect one person, and for 6 years, that one person has no accountability or very little accountability. Whereas you should actually be participating every day in the budget process, in policy making. So you have to redesign the entire system to allow for this citizen participation. And that is, I think, the true essence of democracy. And it will show that countries that have this kind of participation become more resilient and then are able to better participate in the international trading system. Now, it's also been proven empirically that open economic systems are the ones that are able to rapidly eradicate poverty. And it's been listed. So perhaps you could look for the book by Johan Norberg, In Defense of Global Capitalism, that proves that open systems. Vietnam and China have proven that open systems can lift literally hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And you cannot move forward if people are mired in poverty. It's just not possible. No? You cannot have a population that says they're hungry. It's just we shouldn't allow that at all, no. And that's why you have to really look at these open systems, no. Accumulating capital is the most important objective of investment, and that's why you have to have open investment. As a lawyer, as a corporate lawyer, corporate limitations on equity are ineffective in trying to ensure national protection. If you want to protect your industries, then shift it to some form of national security oversight or regulation by the SEC. But don't say 60-40, 70-30. There's no science to it. It doesn't work. Okay. So you should abolish the 60-40 system, the 70-30 system, and shift it to a system of proper government oversight. And certainly do not put investment restrictions in the Constitution. They're the only country that does it. It is the legislature that should set the rules on investment restriction. Okay. It should be the legislature that determines it, because you need the dynamism of the 21st century. Now, going back and I'll conclude this already. Going back to the study, the issue is that the multilateral trading system is becoming more and more digital and AI-driven. And in an AI-driven system, then you need more citizens' oversight over the process. And if you leave it to a highly centralized power, concentrated power, lacking in political competition, transparency, and accountability, okay, then you might lead to a situation where the AI ends up abusing the population. So that's why you need a more direct form of democracy that cannot be achieved through the presidential unitary system. And that is why you must amend the Constitution. Of 2 more minutes. before you decide on whether you go on CONAS, or make sure that there is a proper public consultation and public education on the Constitution. There should be ownership by the population of their Constitution. It belongs to the people. So maybe we must invest in a roadshow or some kind of activity wherein people participate and discuss the Constitution. And if we agree on the new design, then it becomes academic. How you finally formalize it, no? Because the CONAS, that's all a formalization process, no? Okay, and perhaps you might want to go for the cheapest option, the one that will burden the people the least, but at the same time make sure that everybody has been consulted properly. Well, Mr. Chairman, if there's any other question on the particulars, no, the design of a proper constitution, the investment system, the political system, I will certainly make myself available. And thank you very much again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Attorney Abad. Now we will hear from Attorney Vicente Homer Reville, the Constitutional Reform Chairman and Local Government Development Institute Philippines Director.
Honorable members of the Congress, Mr. Chair, why the need to amend the 1987 Constitution? We have been doing the roadshow for the past 3 years on this, together with the chairman, together with no less than Mayor Richard Gomez, when he was the mayor of Ormoc. So yes, we've been around and doing the public consultation, public hearings, and it seems that everyone knows already about the need to really amend the 1987 Constitution. Well, it is not perfect. It is not any more relevant to our times. And after 34 years, there are definite flaws that we need to really change. And some of the provisions are rigid, outdated, obsolete, and not working for the benefit of the people. I will just enumerate some of the flaws of the 1987 Constitution, like the foreign direct investment, in which it is very restrictive, especially sections on Article 12, 14, and 16. The weak political system, also the problematic judicial appointments, the Commonwealth burdened with deciding election cases, the separate voting for the president and the vice president. The Commission on Human Rights is a toothless tiger, and it is very wordy. So now, when browsing through the proposals of Congress, it seems that there's a lot of direction towards the economic argument, which is really about the foreign direct investments. And that's what some of my fellow resources speakers had already said, that FDI, or foreign direct investment, is critical to economic recovery, especially post-pandemic. The Constitution adopted outright boundaries on participation of foreign investors, especially Article 12, Article 14, and Article 16. The Philippines is only number 6 in the foreign direct investment in the ASEAN, and it is perceived as the most restrictive in the entire ASEAN. And the low FDI impacts in our ability to increase our economy. Now, a lot of my fellow resources speakers had already discussed about the foreign direct investments. I'm going to answer some of the possibilities on what mode should be used. Well, if we are going to talk on the best mode of amending the Constitution, it is through a constitutional convention. But it needs a strong political capital. And also, it's very important that it should be done during the start of the term of the president. or maybe the start of the term of the members of the Congress and Senate. Because the people will not be thinking that it will just be propagation of their power and possible term limits problem. But then it needs a lot of political capital. And that is the best mode of changing the Constitution. Secondly, best is to have the incremental approach to constitutional building. Because when we did the roadshow, there's a situation that we have looked at, that the people has to understand what we are trying to amend in the Constitution. Now, if we are going to make the people understand what we are going to amend, we have to reform in an incremental approach, not the entirety of the entire Constitution. Like as what I have read in your proposals, honorable members of the Congress, that you wanted to focus more on the economic provisions, on the foreign direct investments. So that can be a very good approach in amending our Constitution. Regarding also the reforming or adapting existing institutions rather than abolishing them. Because if we will abolish some of the institutions, there will be a natural resistance to change, to reforming the Constitution. If there'll be a possible attack on the very institution of some of the, let's say, the Senate, that will become a big problem for us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if we're going to think of a piecemeal amendment, let's do it through a constituent assembly. Even now, if the members of Congress really just wants to change the economic provisions of the Constitution, it is still best to do it through constituent assembly. If we're going to think of whether Congress can be trusted, it had already been, we have already, in the last Congress, it was already moved that only economic provisions will be changed, and it passed through the third reading. So it means Congress can be trusted with this. So I'm going to put now the word efficiency. The most efficient mode of changing the Constitution, if you only want economic provisions, is do it through constituent assembly. But if you want to really change the entire organic law, entire blueprint of the Constitution, do it through a constitutional convention. So, ladies and gentlemen, it had been 34 years, and there's no better time to do it than now. We need to recover from the pandemic. And if we do the Constitutional Assembly, the Senate can serve as a check to the lower house. And the House has proven that it can in itself limit to the economic amendments. And at the end of the day, it will be the people who will have the final say in a plebiscite. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you, Attorney Reville. And for our last resource person, may we acknowledge Attorney Dr. Froilan Calilong, Director of the Local Government Development Institute Philippines and Senior Faculty Member of the UST Department of Political Science.
Okay, good afternoon to our distinguished members of the Congress and the Constitutional Committee on Constitutional Reform and Amendments, Mr. Chair. And I am Dr. Froilan Calilong from, of course, representing LGDI as well as the academy. And in my many years of teaching local government as well as constitution, I think there's one thing that I was able to prove myself, that if a system is not broken, then why do we need to fix it? But then again, 34 years have passed by, and the Constitution is actually a testament to national growth and development. Then I think we're definitely missing a lot here. We need to say that there is really a must to change to navigate the country to better fit with the changing demands of the time. So my colleagues have already identified the most plausible and I guess the striking amendments that are needed. But I think we are we fail to assess what I call some low-lying fruits. Okay, so rather than changing or going into FDIs immediately, I think what we need to also do here is to strengthen what we already have in place right now. One of which that I'm seeing that needs constitutional reform is the Regional Development Council, for instance. Okay, if we want to strengthen, for example, local governments, if we want to strengthen socio-economic planning, especially on the countryside, in order for us to attain cohesive development, I think it's imperative that we need to strengthen the RDCs. For a very, very long time, the RDCs has been there, but I think it is not performing at par to its mandate, primarily because it was not given adequate attention. At the same time, it was not given the proper funding. So if we want to strengthen local development planning, alongside, of course, the national level, of course, the national counterpart of the RDC is the National Economic Development Authority. I believe it's imperative that we infuse more functions and at the same time reconstitute the mandate of the RDCs. And I think this is one way by which we could strengthen local development planning alongside some other what I call as reforms that have already been instituted, like the approval and the finalization, I believe, of the Mandanas ruling. So this will definitely be a big boost to that if in case we will be able to strengthen the RDC. So yes, I believe that we could do this. We could actually focus on FDIs, attracting these FDIs, but sometimes we need to focus on what is already here, what is already apparent. And I think we could strengthen this. If we could do this, I think this could result into local development as well. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kalilong. So as at this juncture, may we hear comments from the members of the House or interpellations? On the list, we have two members who would like to interpellate. During the interpellations, any resource persons may also share their views on the question from the House member. So to start, we would like to acknowledge first I would like to acknowledge first by seniority, by way of seniority. I'd like to acknowledge Honorable Barsaga to start by way of seniority and thank you very much.
I'm still reviewing my notes. That's why I don't want to start. Well, anyway, I have certain notes here. Of course, we have Attorney Howard Calleja. The charter change should always be for the right reasons, and definitely not for the wrong reasons. As of now, Panyero, do you think that there are right reasons in order to change the Constitution or to amend it?
Sa ngayon po, Mr. Chair, Mr. Congressman, as of today, we're not saying that the Constitution should never be changed, but as of today, we feel that the ills or the problems that are ailing our country is not can be addressed by other means rather than constitutional change.
What do you think will be the number one problem in our country? And what would be the mechanism under the present Constitution which can address the first major problem in our country?
Well, ang isa kong problema na nakikita namin is, of course, it's been 33 years or 36 years, hindi pa po napapasa yung anti-dynasty law natin. We have a very weak checks and balances from executive, legislative, judiciary. because alam na po natin from the executive, merong mayor na kamag-anak, merong congressman na kamag-anak, may senador na kamag-anak, may presidente na kamag-anak. So how can you check and balance somebody within your family? If we correct that, then that is one way. Second po, yung nasabi na po, yung ating agrikultura, sanabi na po kanina, yung onion, hindi naman po mabababa ng ating onion, ng ating constitution, yung ating onion, no? But there are ways. Sinasabi, that's why we're saying the constitution is there, it's not perfect, but the problems can be addressed by other means rather than amending the constitution at this point.
Well, we have several constitutions in the past. We have the Malolos Constitution. We have the 1935 Constitution. We have also the 1973 Constitution. And finally, the 1987 Constitution. In all these constitutions, there were no provisions granting Congress the right to define what would constitute political dynasty.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Attorney Calleja, did you think, or based on your experience and knowledge, were there political dynasties even prior to 1987 Constitution?
Opo, marami po. That's why one of the ills that the 1987 Constitution wanted to correct is to have this political dynasty in the Constitution. However, if in my view, the mistake or the chance was missed when it did not define it properly and leave it for Congress, because nakita na po natin na although marami pong panukala sa Kongreso, wala hong naipasa yung Kongreso for constitution for political dynasty.
Would it be a correct statement that our 40 delegates have seen the problems regarding political 40 members, the Constitutional Convention delegates have already experienced, have seen the problem pertaining to political dynasty?
It would be hard to second guess their reason why they did not put it, but I think they left it to the sound discretion of Congress. Well, yun na nga, whether Congress would define it properly, nasa sa Kongreso po yun. That's why I trust that Congress would still do its mandate under the Constitution.
The members of the Congress before, as the same as the Congress today, most of them are already relatives of the incumbent officers. And therefore, we do not know for practical reasons whether or not an anti-dynasty bill will be passed in Congress.
That's why po I'm not kumbaga confident it will. Kung nakikita ko karamihan ho dito I mean I've also been here a couple of times, not as a member but in one form or the other. Yung iba dito po, asawa na at mga anak na, yung mga nakikita ko na nandito sa Kongreso. So it's really, as I said, it weakens the check and balance, it weakens the rule of law, it weakens the institutions that we have in government.
From 1987 up to the present, there has been no law which has been passed defining what is a political dynasty. Would you be still optimistic that in the coming Congresses, there is a big possibility, a real chance that a law will be passed pertaining to political dynasty?
Opo, in the same manner that I also trust that Congress will do its job, and I also trust that sooner or later the proper time for the proper reasons to amend the Constitution will also happen.
Honorable Barzaga, Honorable, would you like to hear also from Dr. Carlos?
Yes.
Because Dr. Carlos is raising her hand. You are recognized, Dr. Carlos.
Yeah, thank you very much. If I may join in this conversation. For as long as I've been a political scientist, I've always declared that when you put term limits and you prevent people from being voted upon because they happen to have the same surnames or brother, husband, mistresses, etc., of those in power, that is antithetical to democracy. You are really hostage the freedom of choice which we have in our liberal democracy. Political dynasties and term limits are symptoms of things which are infirmed in the system. You know, look at Angela Merkel. if you had term limits, you will not have a physicist for 16 years and really led Germany in its, in its heyday. And by the way, the empirical evidence, with all due respect, Attorney Howard is a very good friend and colleague. The empirical evidence suggests to you, and this is counterintuitive, Orion, that the longer a political leader who is an effective political leader stays in office, the better for that leader to have to effectively govern. Why? Because you don't change them every 2,000 days. You don't change them, the continuity in the office, but you have to make a distinction between political leaders who are incompetent and bobo and political leaders who really know what they're doing and would really want to continue their work. Look what happens. After 6 years, inas mo siya, yung isa susunod, buburahin niya yung ginawa ng 2,000 days. Gusto ba natin ganon? So I hope we will have a rethink on this. And as always, Congressman Yu, Congressman Bersaga, let's base our claims on empirical findings kasi very powerful ang evidence conditions on the ground. Thank you.
Just a follow-up to the observation of Professor Clarita Carlos. For our resource persons, can you name to us the countries who at present prohibit political dynasty? And also at the same time, what countries prohibit or provides for a maximum term of office for any elected public official so that this committee could be guided?
Thank you for that question, Honorable Barzaga. Before that, may we hear from, do you have any further comment on that previous question?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gomez?
Yes, from the time that I entered politics and started working in Congress, ang dami ko na naririnig lagi about political dynasty. Hindi na ipapasa ang batas sa political dynasty simply because ang tao binibigyan natin ng karapatan, ng opportunity na pumili ng mga leaders na gusto nila. Hindi ko papasa yung anti-dynasty bill because, or law because nga meron mo tayong election. If you do not allow election, ano mangyayari sa atin? You're giving the people the choice, the chance. Piliin nila kung sino ang leader nila. Ganun lang ho kasimple yun. It's that basic and simple. Meron na eleksyon, kung ayaw ng tao dun sa tumatakbo, hindi ho nila i-elect yun. Kung maganda ang ginagawa ng mga leaders natin, maganda ang ginagawa ng politicians natin, they will definitely continue voting these people. Sino may gusto ng, for the past 30, 50 years, isang family name lang. Pero kung maganda ang ginagawa nila, talagang iiwan ng tao yun dyan. Kung pangit na ginagawa nila, hanggang sa apo nila, hindi na ho nila iboboto yun. It's that basic and simple. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Gomez. So any resource person would like to answer the afternoon session? I'm sorry, but we need the afternoon session resource persons.
I'm her assistant.
Mr. Carlos, in behalf of you,
Yes.
from
She defers to me on this part.
okay, Dum.
So,
You have to.
Right, thank you very much, Madam Chair. So regarding anti-dynasty laws, first of all, if you all go to Google and you say the anti-dynasty, everything you see is Philippines. And there are no other countries that have anti-dynasty laws or anything like that in their constitution. Secondly, that other question about term limits. The only other country I know that has term limits for anything other than a president is Mexico. Somos como los mexicanos. Somos los mexicanos de Asia. Tenemos un sexenio. We have a sexenio, the 1 6-year term that can never be re-elected. We have the system that Mexico has. Their senators are also 6 years, only 2 terms. Their congressmen or the members of their National Assembly only have 2 terms also, 3 years. Different from us, tayo 3, sa kanila 2 lang. We are actually using a Mexican system. Yung ba ang sistema na gusto ng Pilipinas? Gumaya sa puro droga?
Yeah, but Congressman,
Thank you, Mr. Dum.
Yeah.
To add, let's hear from Dr. Carlos.
I think the real contest here would be data qua data. To what extent will term limits in fact produce the desired result? To what extent will preventing people who belong to one family or up to X number of relationship, will it produce the desired result? Because if we don't have those data, then I think the claim that political dynasties and term limits, in fact, are solutions to the things that we see are challenges in our political system will not work. It will not wash. So I think we will have to be governed here by the scientific procedure. Dapat meron po tayong numero and the numbers should tell you a story. Diba? Tama ang sinabi ni Kong Richard kung ikaw gusto kong electing si Richard, no? Kasi gusto ko siyang electing for as long kasi nakita ko siya nagtatrabaho. Pero kung nakita kong ang tamad-tamad niya, siyempre sa susunod hindi ko na sa i-elect. Are the electoral rate stupid people? No, they're not. In fact, more and more, they're becoming more mature. Hindi nyo nakikita, nag-iiba yung political landscape natin. So again, to repeat, term limits and political dynasties, let us not put that in the Constitution anymore because we are following liberal democracy and it is so antithetical to our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carlos. Yes,
Yes.
Honorable Balzaga.
So to confirm, according to the statement of Mr. Dumdum, insofar as political dynasty is concerned, based on his knowledge, it is only present in the Philippines. And when it comes to term limit, it is only present in Mexico. And according to Dr. Carlos, what would be the desired result? Of course, the basic result which everybody wants is good governance, the welfare of the people. When it comes to the term limit as provided for under the Constitution, we have seen that it has been violated indirectly. When the husband reach already the maximum 3-term period, it will be his wife or his children who shall succeed him, and thereafter, after the lapse of 1 term, then the original officer will be the one going back to the same position. And also, we're living under a state of democracy. We follow the basic rule that sovereignty resides in the people and all government authority emanates from them. It might be a violation of this basic principle if the people will not be given the right to elect the officers whom they consider will be good for the country. Well, another point, kay Dr. Navarro na lang ako. Dr. Navarro, of course, you have emphasized that we have to liberalize the restrictive economic provisions.
Dr. Navarro, you're
Yes.
recognized.
Sir, yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was to mention that the Philippines is #1, which contains provisions in the Constitution, which is most restrictive, and #3 in the world.
Yes, sir. According to the ranking by the OECD on all FDI restrictiveness, we are 3rd most restrictive in the world. And among ASEAN countries, we are the 1st rank most restrictive ASEAN country.
So who is #1 and #2 in the entire world? Continue.
Let me pull up the database. Okay. Libya with the FDI restrictiveness index of 0.713, that's #1. And then #2, Palestinian Authority with 0.388 FDI index. So #3, FDI index restrictiveness is 0.374. So that's what
A safe assumption or a safe statement that among democratic countries, the Philippines is the #1 country which has the most restrictive provisions.
according to the data as of
Yes.
2020 submissions by
Okay.
countries.
Now, you have mentioned a while ago that when we lift these restrictive economic provisions, actually it will not be a lifting in toto. There will be gradual lifting. It is not totally giving the total ownership, but there are certain gradual restrictions to be lifted. In a nutshell, how will you proceed with this so that we can be guided?
By inserting in the Constitution, unless otherwise provided by law, the implication is there will be an incremental approach because it will be according to legislation design. So whatever sectors, after careful scrutiny by Congress, whatever sector needs to be prioritized in the liberalization, then the legislation for that has to go first. And if I may add, I wasn't able to discuss this before because of the 2-minute limit. In the legislation design, you can also include, if national security requires, certain provisions like authorizing the president to suspend or revise certain agreements or terminate, and also authorizing certain administrative agencies to revoke licenses or issuances, certificates related to the liberalization law if national security requires, or if the involved foreign entities failed audits in certain number of years or certain number of consecutive audits. Thank you, Your Honor.
Dr. Navarro, it is sad to state that most of us, with the exception of my good friend Joey Salceda, are not experts in so far as economy is concerned. And therefore, can we suggest, if you can submit a position paper regarding the so-called incremental approach, which you think should be considered by Congress in the event that the Constitution will be amended and that there will be a lifting of the restrictive provisions. Because your position paper and our discussion will always be considered as part of the proceedings.
Yes, Your Honor. I will prepare a position, longer position paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'll be giving time to our colleagues.
Thank you, Honorable Barzaga. So our next interpolator
Madam Chair.
is
I just want to follow up because of Congressman Bursaga. If our good resource persons also would be much willing to submit also your narrative reports, we would appreciate it so that we can evaluate and at the end of the day, we can decide on what to do. Thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion, Honorable Palma. Yes, the resource persons are requested to submit their position papers to the committee. So now we hear from Honorable Paul Daza, the Senior Deputy Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to my colleagues, and thank you to all our resource persons for being here this afternoon. I'd like to pursue a little further the points made by the Honorable Barzaga regarding political dynasty. My understanding in the 1986 Constitutional Commission, the debate was what Secretary Carlos said, that any term limits and any political dynasty provision is anti-democratic. I think I recall then Mr. Monsod, Christian Monsod, who argued for social justice, that in a Philippine setting, it's the same names, the same families that dominate the political landscape. And I think when that was taken to a vote, the social justice argument prevailed, and that's why there's a provision in our present constitution. Now, for the record, I don't think it's just Mexico that has term limits. I know because I practiced law for a while in California. The U.S. has term limits. The president, vice president is limited to 8 years, 2 terms, 4 years. Many states in the United States, for their assemblies or state level, have term limits. So, just for the record. Okay, thank you. Now, I'd like to ask Attorney Calera or anyone, especially PIDS. I absolutely love PIDS. I read a lot of your materials. Well, as Secretary Carl said, our debate and our decisions should be based on data, on facts, not just personal opinions. So I'm curious, are there any research, any papers that relates anti-dynasty provisions anywhere in the world to economic growth and equity and social equity and economic equity. Can I? Well, I would love to hear from the Honorable Society.
Helen Egler to
Yes,
University, short-term time horizon and economic growth, the impact of legislative term limits on economic policy. Very negative term limits. This is for 115 countries for 30 years. So there is empirical evidence that term limits economic growth, limits income, limits the longevity, as well as limits in.
I think the question is not the term limit, but the political
This
dynasty.
is the anti-democratic character of term limits. So in short, if you have an analogy with respect to political dynasty and put side by side essentially a term limit, empirically, there's empirical evidence. Kita ko na lang sa iyo.
No, I'd like to get a copy, Honorable Society, of that report, but we have to kind of unbundle the issue. Term limit is a little different from the other anti-political dynasty provision. So that may be the case for that study. So there's also another component of that. It's not limiting terms, but limiting relatives, family members, and having a formula for that. So would anyone care to comment, and are there any studies on other types of dynasty issues?
Thank you,
I think
Mr.
the Honorable Darva is pointing to Attorney Calleja.
Anyone?
Okay,
just a
Attorney
short,
Calleja and then Dr. Carlos.
Just a
Yes.
short statement, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Congressman. Simple lang po ito, Mr. Congressman, in our view, no. Although we always would like to compare with other countries, we have to look at our experience, especially with dynasties. And nasabi niyo na po na yung during the Constitutional Convention or Commission of 1986, it's not about really any issue, but really of experience and social justice. That's why it passed. So looking at that history, we look at why it was included in our Constitution. And I think again, with the due respect to my boss, Secretary Carlos, ang determinative word doon is if it is a effective leader or an effective or a good politician, okay ang dynasty. Yun ang sinasabi, kung good. Kung bad, di syempre palitan natin. So what we are trying to do there is reducing or minimizing the risk of having bad leaders, because of course we are not saying that our constituents cannot choose, but we are saying that the Constitution is there as the basic principle to put safeguards to us, no? But we make mistakes. That's why we have safeguards there. We're not, we're not saying that it is a perfect constitution, but this issue just came up because it is one of the things that for the past 33, 36 years that our constitution has been in place, this is one of the provisions that has not really been implemented properly. Thank you po. Salamat.
Thank you, Attorney Calleja. Before we proceed to Dr. Carlos, I'd like to inform all members that your presence here are already excused in the session hall. Yes, Dr. Carlos.
As on several points, first of all, of course, most everyone knows that the 87 Constitution is one of the longest, if not the most talkative constitutions. Why? Because after the 21 years of the Marcos regime, what we really wanted was to find ways to not commit the same errors in judgment. So the Constitution became, Howard, yung sagot sa mga karamdaman nung nagdaan, which is an error in judgment also. So that I hope if we have a new one to be designed, it must be brief. It must only provide the broad strokes so that it does not tie us and hostage us to the nitty-gritty. Wag nating lagyan ng detalye yun because You see, I think earlier, Attorney Abad was the one who said the world is moving so fast. No? AI, hindi natin na mahabol yun eh. Parang sentient na nga yung AI. So, wag nating lagnan ng tanikala ang ating kamay na sana, and I think Kong Rufus agrees with this, broadly conceived lang yung Constitution, maigsi lang siya. Dahil bibigyan mo siya ng alagwa eh. No, Howard? Bigyan mo siya ng wiggle room. Kanya siguro yung sinabi kanina ng estudyante ko si Miss Navarro na na yung wag natin agad bigyan ng masamang ibig sabihin yung to be provided by law. Because for all you know, yung mga legislators naman, syempre naman they have many things between their ears. Hindi naman lahat yan ay magnanakaw o ano. So to be provided, the fact that they were elected in their districts is already a monument to that. Okay, now what we should really be addressing is not term limits and political dynasties per se, Congressman Daza. Magkapinsan nga yan eh. The reason why nagkakaroon ka political dynasty, kasi sinabi mo, ikaw 9 years ka lang dyan ha. Pataas na 9 years, ay wala na ako. O kaya 12 years, di ba, sa senator. Therefore, ito nang asawa ko na lang ang Tapos mamaya, after 3 years, ako uli So, this is a farce altogether, isn't it? Are we doing that? Ano ang pwede nating solusyonan? Kasi nakikita ko kung yung dibuhan ng political system eh. Ang dami niyang moving parts, di ba? Well, because, sorry sa commercial because I have written, Richard, a book on electoral reform. No, bigyan kitang kopya. Si Richard kasi kapitbahay namin yan noon dito, nung maliit pa kami. Palitan natin ang alating electoral reform. Ang electoral reform, alam ni Kong Rufus doon, nakadikit sa political party system. It will either bring about a multi-party system or a two-party system. That is how the electoral systems are configured. Instead of having a single-member district system, why don't you have a mixed single-member district and PR, proportional representation? I know this is not the forum for that, pero siguro Kong Rufus, you can call another, and I will explain that. Basta may pisara ako dito, no? Mas simple lang naman doon. And if we're going to have a CONCOM, why don't we move away from the single-member district? Why don't we have a multiple-member district? Ilan ba distrito?
252.
Okay. Japan ata may multiple-member district. Imbis isa lang yan sa isang electoral district, dalawa. Pag-usapan ninyo kung ilan ang gusto nyo. Kasi we're talking representation, Kong Rufus eh. Pero let's just open our minds to it. Buksan lang natin ang mind natin. Imbis na single member district, multiple member district per So, again, as a political scientist, I would like us to pay attention to critical variables because some variables are not critical. When they are not critical, they are not predictor. When you say predictor, if you have an array of variables there, which is the one that will lead to the desired effect. And when you have an array of variables there, the empirical evidence will support that the electoral system, in fact, has a very, very strong potency among all the other variables. By the way, Horad, nakita mo na rin yung empirical evidence na to. Among our colleagues, no? Talagang inano namin to, nagbangayan kami tungkol dito. Ang ginawa nila, nagawa sila ng correlates. No? But when you do correlates, you're not just following the numbers. Hindi mo sinabing, this is significant, related significant to a 5 confidence level. Kunyari mong ganun. So sabi ko, hindi mo pwedeng makita yan kasi the numbers should tell a story. Di ba, Kong Rufus? Porque nakikita mo sa correlates mo, nakikita mo sa regression, na the numbers are telling you merong correlates and they're significant. But I want to see the story on the ground. Because the numbers might tell you a correlation, but the situation on the ground will tell you a very absurd relationship. So yun eh. Kasi sabi nila, pag may political dynasty, mataas ang poverty. Sabi ko, ba't mo nasabi yan? Ibigay mo nga sa akin through process tracing. No. Huwag na natin sabihin kung sinong colleague natin nagawa nun. Sinewtown ko siya. So sabi ko, ang poverty nang gagaling sa iba't ibang dimensions, sources, hindi mo sasabihin galing yun sa political dynasty. Kasi, papakita mo sa akin na ito, poverty, nanggaling dito, pangalan nito political dynasty. Diba? So, here again, I think, with all due respect, I think, please listen to the scientists kasi ito po yung ginagawa namin. We will say, I don't know if the data is not there. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. So I wanted to close the discussion on political dynasty. So I want to ask Dr. Navarro, Madam Chair,
Yes,
if,
sir.
if there are any studies, research that correlates term limits, dynasties to economic development, poverty.
Right now, there's no comprehensive study conducted by PIDS, but it was mentioned in 2018 PIDS paper by Sikat and Madawin that says that the spending priorities of an incumbent official who is facing his or her last term in office, the priorities depend on his or her membership in a political dynasty. So I haven't read the paper because I was USEC at NEDA at that time. Pero titingnan ko yung details and I will send to you a copy. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I think Attorney
Thank you.
Abad wanted to join in on that.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Daza. That's your last question.
No, ang dami ko pa nga eh. Naubos yung,
Okay.
what, do we have a limit?
Times kasi
Okay, yeah.
importante.
Yeah,
Especially
that-
your points.
Yeah.
Yes, so please proceed.
Yeah,
Honorable
it's
Daza.
good, it's free-flowing discussion. Yeah, I have more questions, but sige po, Madam Chair, Attorney Abad, I think one.
Attorney Abad is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Your Honors. The economist James Buchanan said that as political and economic actors in society behave based on rules, no, that are set, the rules of the game or the system. No? My comrade Orion has always pointed out that the Constitution is the operating system of the country. No? And we tend to, our behavior is shaped by the system. No? So ang dynasty, the dynasty that we are trying to address, no? The one that we see in a negative light, is actually a means of getting around or taking advantage of the existing system. No? Meaning that because there are term limits, also that there is an opaque system and a highly concentrated governance, there's this economic incentive to keep the power, the political power within a family. No, it's the simplest way to sort of extend your power because there's a term limit. But there's a need to extend power because there's that opaque or that lack of transparency in the system. Madam Chair and Mr. Chairman and Your Honors, if you adopted Dr. Carlos's model for electoral reform, no, plus you have a parliamentary system, okay, federated, no, so that there is governance that is already distributed among the regions. You sort of evenly distribute the gravity or centers of power, and then you allow for citizens' participation in the legislative process. There will be very little incentive to continue with a dynasty. It becomes moot and academic. No, you don't need to put anti-dynasty provisions because again, these are wrong solutions to the problem. You have to address the problem first, which is that there's a lack of participation of the people in the process. And this will be addressed in a parliamentary system. Now, parliamentary systems are, of course, different. We design our own, no? This is something that we can discuss. No? But certainly, the presidential unitary system is the one that's incentivizing all of these problems that the 1986 Constitution was trying to address. No? Unfortunately, the CONCOM was under time pressure. Actually, there was a statement that it was supposed to be a temporary constitution just so that they could legitimize the Cory administration at the time. But then we never went back and said, oh, okay, now that it's settled, we're stable, let's review the Constitution and turn it into a truly modern Constitution that allows for more participation of the people. And that's what we have to address immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney. You have other questions?
Yes. No, let me go back to Dr. Navarro, Madam Chair. In the study that you mentioned, let's do the reverse. Who were the top 3 least restrictive in terms of FDI?
let me pull up the database. By the way, it's not a PIDS study, but it's a publicly available database. Okay. It's the in the bottom. I mean, in the least restrictive. That's Kosovo, Luxembourg, and Slovenia.
So could from that study, from your analysis, could you make a determination that it's clear from that study that the more restrictive you are, the less the economic development you have, and then vice versa, the more you're open and less restrictive, that you have a better shot at a better economy?
Again, it's not a study, but a database that I mentioned, but I can include in the position paper an analysis of the factors influencing inward foreign direct investment. And as I mentioned earlier in my statement, it's not only removing restrictions that matter, but other reforms as well, like having ensuring that there is a rule of law, the legislative and judicial frameworks ensure matters like sanctity of contracts, ensuring that the ease of doing business with subnational institutions, with LGUs, is there. There's ease of doing business, and other factors like improving the quality of infrastructure, improving the way we implement projects.
Okay, I understand, and I know this is a heavy load for you, but because we should be data-based, our decision should be made based on research, data, and the right information. So if you could just do your best to relate specifically on the issue of foreign direct investment, because that's one of the main topics in terms of economic provisions that's not being discussed, that should be amended. So if you could do that, and my second request would be as to foreign ownership. If there's any studies, because I know that we're one of the rare countries now that limit foreign ownership on land, from my understanding. There were earlier debates, previous debates about that. So I personally wanted to make a decision. I don't have a decision on that yet, but I wanted, some good research and data and statistics. Is that something that you could do, Dr. Navarro, through PIDS?
Yes, sir. Although there are no specific studies, as I mentioned, but data are available. And as I mentioned, there's already a history of legislating removal of or at least amending restrictions, and we can look at sectors like the energy sector, the banking sector, and we'll see what we can gather with the help of my research analyst, and we'll present it as a new analysis.
But for the record, I assume that your initial opinion is that the more open an economy is, which includes foreign ownership and less restrictions, as of 2023, it would be the better decision or the better way to go. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's a fair statement. And if I may add, the incremental approach, I think, is necessary, because each sector needs to be scrutinized carefully, and we need in the legislation design features which will allay the fears of those who are concerned about national security concerns or security of specific sectors.
Okay, now to be equal to the others, are there any studies that indicate otherwise from any of the resource persons here? Because there are some members of the House who believe otherwise, that opening the economy and all of that's not going to do any good. It hasn't done good and it won't do any good. Any studies to the contrary, Dr. Navarro, that you're aware, or any of the resource person?
Any resource person? Well, we have for Mr. Dun will answer. Mr. Chair, we'd like to request Dr. Navarro to submit the analysis of the relationship between the FDIs and the economic development of your presentation a while ago.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to talk about several things that Honorable Paul Daza has mentioned earlier. So regarding the FDI part, there are these books that have actually mentioned that have shown that the more open an economy, then the better the results will be. So the more inclusive, the less extractive, the less exclusivist, para sa iilan lang, para sa mga oligarchs lang, the better. So these two books, Why Nations Fail, False Economy, and there's also this one from Adam Smith to Michael Porter. These books talk all about that. And of course, the empirical evidence of all the countries around us na nagbukas. And then regarding sa OECD listing po, yung least restrictive one, so we have Kosovo and Luxembourg and what was the other one? Slovenia. Luxembourg has one of the highest GDPs in the world. So if we do a GDP check, GDP per capita check, ano siya, they're at the top, no? And then Slovenia and Kosovo are countries that recently decided that they wanted to catch up. So especially Kosovo, being a new country, they wanted to catch up, so they decided, let's open the floodgates, let's be as open as possible para dumami ang trabaho ng mga tao namin. Now, going to the other question, sir, about the term limits and first of all the dynasties and then the term limits. There is actually a lot of research on that. There's one particular paper, parliamentary privilege in Canada's parliament. Walang baterya. So, parliamentary privilege kinship in Canada's parliament by Dr. Matthew Godwin. So the results of this study shows that because Canada improved their economy, so as they improved, naglesen yung kanilang mga political families. So there started to be a much more diversity in the composition of their lower house and the Senate. So basically, there is a lot of evidence that as a country gets richer, nawawala ang dynasties, or at least nalilesen man lang. And the other thing regarding the term limits and its connection with dynasties, this is from Dr. Pablo Querubin. The research paper is called Political Reform and Elite Persistence, Term Limits and Political Dynasties in the Philippines. This is the one that says that because of the term limits imposed by the 1987 Constitution, immediately we ended up having a worse case of political dynasties. When there were no political dynasties, they became thin dynasties, and where there were thin dynasties, they became fat dynasties. So lumala ang problema. And then last but not the least, I did want to mention that evidence shows that not all dynasties are bad. The problem is not dynasties. The problem is lousy, incompetent politicians. And where do we screen them out? We don't screen them out at the family level. We screen them out at the individual level. And that is what can happen in a parliamentary system. Ang walang kwentang leader, pwedeng tanggalin agad kung talagang walang kwenta siya. And then because magde-develop lalo yung party system, yung walang kwenta na member of parliament, his own party will disown him and prevent him from being able to run under the party. So if we go for a parliamentary system, I know a lot of people don't understand how a parliamentary system works yet, but actually it's very clear that the empirical evidence shows that parliamentary systems really are superior to presidential systems.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to ask the chairman, Madam Chair, has anyone indicated what the cost would be? I want now to discuss about the mode. Magkano po? To do a constitutional convention, has that been quantified?
We have a letter to COMELEC Chairman George Garcia. They are about to submit on whether first how much it will cost if it is included, if a con is included in the barangay elections, and how much it will be, what will be the cost if it's standalone election for delegates. So we will soon have that. It's better to have the COMELEC do that because they're the ones who prepare the budget. Once we have that, we give a copy to our senior deputy leader, Paul Daza.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Chairman. No, I was hoping
Just to
that.
clarify, Mr. Chairman, that will be the expenses only for the plebiscite.
No, this is the expenses for the election.
Yes,
The
for the
plebiscite will
election.
be following after, if we have agreed to have a constitutional convention, there'll be another expense for the plebiscite. So therefore, this is just, we're asking how much will it cost? If, for example, if we are able to pass a bill for a constitutional convention, 2/3 vote by both houses, how much it will be, what will be the expense if it is included on October 30, 2023 barangay elections? Or we have a standalone, hindi mahabol yung sa October, how much is the cost? So that is the cost for the election. There will be another cost for the plebiscite.
For the plebiscite?
Yeah, the cost of,
No.
the cost of the,
Yes, I understand. That
the
will be
convention
the
itself.
cost for the election of the members of the Constitutional Convention.
Yeah.
But our obligation to fund does not end after the election has been made. We have also to determine how much will it cost
Yes.
to house salaries, etc., of the members of the Constitutional Convention.
Yes, I have an answer for that because it is in my resolution of both houses number 2. There will be a per diem of our delegates, elected delegates, for 6 months, January 4, 2024 to June 30, 6 months, 10,000 pesos per diem, exclusive of the travel expenses. And
Ballpark figure, how much will it cost?
well, we haven't really finalized that because we're not sure. We will make some pencil pushing on this so that we can also know how much it will cost. Okay, so right now wala pa. So I think we will ask the committee already based on my resolution, how much will be spent if we already have a after the election of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention.
I heard from Attorney
Reveal?
that in the event that there will be a constitutional convention,
Yeah.
it will grant the power to the members of the Constitutional Convention to consider revisions or amendments any of the provision of the Constitution. Will that be a correct assumption?
Well, the answer is yes. In a constitutional convention, everything is on the table.
In short,
All
the-
provisions will be passive. There can be amendments because it's a constituent supreme power.
Yes, in short, the powers of the Constitutional Convention will be complete, plenary, all-encompassing, and Congress in the law providing for the election of the Constitutional Convention cannot limit the provisions of the constitutions which could be the subject of discussion, amendment, or revision of the Constitutional Convention.
Yes, Chairman PD is correct. No limit at all. It's a constitutional convention. However, we, the proponents like me, in a constitutional convention, we would like, and that is my wish, I'll be therefore be requesting our elected ones to concentrate on the economic provisions. Kasi to me, economics muna tayo. Then we can follow with the political amendments. Masyadong madugo yung sama mo ng ang political amendments eh. Kulang muna tayo. Let us have the economic provisions. After all, these economic provisions have been approved in the 18th Congress by 3/4 vote, sent to the Senate, and it just died there at it lie there. No? So, yun ang problema sa Constituent Assembly. Ayaw talaga sometimes ng Senado to really just even hear our approved Constituent Assembly approvals. So yan, that's why kon ako ngayon eh. Oo, kasi wala, I mean, we might not really get the 3/4 vote eh. They're afraid na in the Constituent Assembly, maski limited tayo sa economic provisions, they're afraid that baka mapasok yung abolition nila or the regionalization. Kasi pinag-usapan na yun eh. Yeah, even if it's very clear, there can be no way that there can be in the Senate a political amendment because our two-thirds vote is only on economic amendments. But yet there is a psyche that there may be some political amendments. So that's the answer to your question.
So that they would agree.
Precisely. So I still believe that if we are able to, you know, the NGOs, the organizations, those who feel for our country, will ask the Senate, economic lang tayo. Yung unless otherwise provided by law. Now, of course, there are also opposition to that. But, you know, we believe that we have passed it in Congress, nilagyan natin ng unless provided by law, and it was approved here by 3/4 vote. Yeah. So yes, we can continue, Madam Chair.
Okay. May
Yes,
I?
Honorable Dasa, you may
Okay.
continue.
Thank you to both Chairman Rodriguez, Kong Barzaga. Actually, I was leading in that direction. But first, my understanding is, and I think the chairman articulated very well, that a constitutional convention is really a quasi-sovereign body. Meaning that there is no way for the House or for Congress to pass the enabling legislation, whether it's a joint concurrent resolution or whatever it may be, that can restrict the agenda of that CONCON because it's a quasi-sovereign entity. So meaning, Mr. Chair, should we have a constitutional convention, then it might be fair to state that it may not just be economic provisions that will be discussed, but other non-economic provisions, political provisions.
The gentleman is correct.
Okay. Now, because of that possibility, and I think many stakeholders, the public, media, I'm sure even now may misinterpret that. I'm sure there are certain sectors who might say that there will be hidden agenda. Should that happen? So let me look at the other side of the coin, because the other option is a constituent assembly. Okay. Now, before I do that, in relation to Kong Barsaga's comments, could we ask the COMSEC, the committee, to at least estimate or even guesstimate and quantify what the total cost would be if we had an election, whether it's during the barangay election or a separate election, all the way through the plebiscite? I think it will serve this committee well in the House to have at least some sense of what the total cost will be, because at the end of the day, when it's taken to a vote in the committee, debate on the floor, you will be asked that, because I will ask you that. Would that be okay, Madam Chair, if we find a way for the COMSEC to at least try to quantify the total cost, including the plebiscite?
Well, parliamentary inquiry. Insofar as the plenary is concerned, we shall be only discussing about the expenses for the Constitutional Convention in the event that we have already agreed to draft a law calling for a Constitutional Convention. Also, as I have mentioned by Congressman Dasa, it is possible that the public might have the misconception that insofar as Constitutional Convention is concerned, we might have a hidden agenda. And thirdly, on the other end, if we shall be having charter change through Constituent Assembly, the issue of hidden agenda will no longer arise, considering that we have already proposed what are the proposed changes by Constituent Assembly in the proposed amendment of the Constitution. And thirdly, regardless of what mode we adopt, whether it would be Constitutional Convention or Constituent Assembly, in Constitutional Convention, as we have seen and experienced, people are against charter change. We have to tell to the people, even a roadshow, the importance of changing the Constitution. we have to convince majority of 60 to 70% billion Filipinos that there is a need for a constitutional convention. In the same manner that if we have to convince these senators who are knowledgeable insofar as the Constitution and the problems of the country are concerned, finally they might arrive at the conclusion that indeed the change in the economic provisions are really necessary, although it will not be a drastic exchange as may be provided by law. Like what we did in the, what Congress is that? During the time of Speaker Belmonte?
15 Congress.
15 Congress.
15 Congress.
So we have to consider all these factors.
Thank you, Honorable Barzaga. Before we continue, Honorable Barzaga, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our Deputy Speaker, Honorable Aurelio Dong Gonzalez Jr. Yes, please proceed.
So to recap on my request on quantifying the cost, is that something that the committee can do, Madam Chair, Chairman?
It's the expertise under the doctrine of primary jurisdiction. There's the entity who would know exactly how much is the paper, the ink, and everything will be the COMELEC. And that's why we will reiterate our request to give us those figures as soon as possible. It's been about more than a month, right? And the COMELEC has not yet answered. So siguro we have to follow that up so that we can exactly know how much it will cost. Election, plebiscite.
Can I answer that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, of course, our Deputy Speaker can answer that.
Well, quantifying the cost, we have already a discussion prior to the COMELEC. It will cost 10 to 12 billion for this proposal. So we have a lot of hearings, and I think I have only 3. Every hearing I'm here, and another consultation out of town. 1, are you in favor to amend the Constitution? Number 1. Number 2, what mode? Con. Number 3, EP. What is EP? Economic provision. So para hindi na tayo masyadong lumalayo, siguro dun muna tayo mag-focus to sa ating discussion, Mr. Chairman. Salamat, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, so, interject. Yung sinabi ni DS.
Yes,
Madam Chair pala.
Castro.
Honorable Castro is recognized.
Yung po ba sinabi ni DS ay yung tungkol doon sa pinaplano niyo po, according to your according to your proposal po, ganun po.
No, I have my own proposal. My dear Congresswoman, my proposal is on us and term limit. But I'm listening this morning and previous hearings. We're discussing of economic provision. That's why I submitted my memorandum this morning, Mr. Chairman, for the economic provision. So my proposal is term limit. From 3 years to 5 years, only 2 terms. I have my own proposal.
Yes, kasi pag sinabi nating constitutional convention, di ba, we are opening all the provisions of the Constitution. So yun po yung mangyayari. Pero sinabi po ni kanina ni Attorney Reveal, pag it is a constitutional assembly, parang may certain provisions ka lang na pwedeng baguhin. So yun po yung difference nung So we would like sige, so you
Honorable Daza to continue.
I'll wind up. I have one more topic. So I think Madam Chair, Chairman, it seems clear that in a constitutional convention we cannot limit the provisions or the agenda that body will consider. And second, Madam Chair, from no less than the Deputy Speaker, the cost is about 10 to 12 billion pesos, which is substantial. That's going to guide me in making a decision if should we take this to a vote. But let me now go to just one last item. I was hoping Secretary Carlos was here, but anyway, thank you for your comments, Dr. Calilong, about empowering RDC. You had mentioned issues on governance, all of that. Similar to Attorney Abad, I think mentioned about budget process participation. Could you expound a little bit, and are there any opportunities, because we're talking about charter change, on Can you expound a little bit more on what both of you had mentioned about budget reforms, regional development council, and empowering the local government? Could you care to comment more on what you had said earlier?
Yes, Attorney Abad.
Okay. Yeah, Your Honor, with regard to the budget process, no, my assertion was that the parliamentary system actually is designed, no, that's why it's called the House of Commons. It's actually like a town hall, no, where there's all the discussion on budgeting and disbursement of funds are done there. But the ministers or the heads of departments are also present. And even now, parliaments are now open to the public. No? So you could actually really take apart or study very carefully how budgets are developed and then spent. And this can be done through a parliamentary system. Now, with regard to the sort of the either the mode of strengthening RDCs, which is sort of following the Spanish model of limited autonomy under a centralized system. Well, what you're doing is giving more budget power to the regions, no? But it's still a grant of authority from the central power, from let's say Madrid or whoever's the capital, to these autonomous regions or what we call the RDCs. No? The federal system, however, you change the sort of you turn the tables, no? The budgeting process is sovereign power now of each state or region, no? And the regions actually are the ones that set up the federal government or the capital. So the relationship is different. It's federal regions now as co-equal partners and putting up a federal government, no, which is an instrumentality of this federation. No? That's why the relationship is different, and there is a stronger feeling of sovereignty in the regions. No, it's not just a budgeting power, but a power, I guess, a sense of ownership. No, and I think that's the difference. No? So, well, with the combination of parliamentary design or systems in a regionalized or federated system, I think you'll see more transparency, more participation of communities, and I think a more equitable and more just distribution of wealth. That's my take on that.
Madam Chair, Dr. Calino, could you care to comment?
Yes, basically, since we're talking about economic reforms here, right, since early this morning, and I believe that political reforms are quite far-fetched at this point in time, and I think the closest thing to that is federalism. But as early as 2016, we actually have gone through the process of coming up with roadshows, making the people understand what federalism is, but I think it failed to get enough traction. So what I'm saying here is that instead of harboring on something that is quite difficult politically to attain, I think what we need to strengthen right now are what is already in place. And the RDCs are there. It's just that they are not very well being harnessed to attain its fullest potential. So if we could probably invest more resources, provide the right structures, and come up with some systemic reforms in relation to strengthening the regional development councils, I think it will really be able to attain its about reasons or mandate for its existence. So I think we could use the amendments to the constitution reform, particularly to create avenues by which we could provide them with more teeth. Because I believe that's the problem right now. Nandyan sila, pero hindi natin masyado napapansin kasi wala masyado silang elbow room to actually maneuver. So I think if we could empower them, the regional development councils could really hasten socioeconomic development, especially on the countryside, so that we will be able to attain local development to its fullest.
But just an legislation to do that, or a constitutional amendment to be able to attain what you just said, Dr. Kalilong?
Yes, yes. Legislation can be done, but if we try to look at it, there have been so many attempts at reorganizing the Regional Development Council, but I believe it did not still go up to its fullest. Yung kanyang dapat talagang ibigay sa atin. No? So naniniwala ako na kailangan talagang ipasok natin sa constitutional reform. And Attorney Vince Reville here, who happened to be the core chairman from the DILG, would like to also add a thing or two about how we could strengthen it.
Well, the concept of strengthening, empowering the Regional Development Council, it is a prelude towards the federalism. As what the past administration had been advocating for. So actually what we just want to do with the Regional Development Council is that to have its own funds and have the power to utilize those funds. And not just what is the present situation, which is just purely recommendatory. So, and that will be the reason why they are going to have the Regional Development Council's strength and they'll have their autonomy somehow, is so that is the prelude towards federalism. That we are going to ensure that the regions will be given equitable distribution of wealth. And so that there will be less concentration in the center and it will be distributed throughout the country through the Regional Development Councils.
As a follow-up on that, Madam Chair, my last one is related to budget or budget reforms and empowering the regions and the LGUs. Can I ask any resource person, in the 1987 Constitution, Madam Chair, Chairman, they created the Department of Budget and Management. DBM was a creation of that Constitution. And what had happened, Mr. Chair, and I'm sure you probably will agree with me, what had happened was the power of the purse is not truly with the House, with Congress. The check and balance had been tilted in favor of the executive because even if you appropriate funds, the release is dictated by DBM through the president. So my question is, can anyone share with the committee what the setup as to the budget was before the 87 Constitution? Would anybody know?
Attorney Abad.
Actually, Your Honor, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, the only difference really was that the Department of Budget and Management was an office, under the office of the President, similar to the US. It's Office of Budget and Management, OBM, but has that same power. No, I think that's the problem. The dilemma is you legislate the general appropriations, but the real power, the power of disbursement is still with the president, is still with this one person. And that is the problem with the presidential system.
Yeah. So, Madam Chair, my train of thought on that is, because we're talking about economic provisions, economic reform, the national budget can't be any closer to economic reform. I mean, that's money that's here in the Philippines. You don't have to wait for foreign investors. And my train of thought on that is that it might be germane to the discussion on charter change, because we're talking about economic provisions and the budget process, empowering the LGUs, how it's appropriated, how it's released. is really related. And I wish Secretary Kraus was here because I wanted to ask her what the setup was before the 87 Constitution. Because I know in other parts of the world, there is a better balance of power. Congress can appropriate, and the executive cannot randomly just choose what's released and what's not. If you're not in the same, group, certain departments, projects, programs, or districts or provinces will not be released the funds, even though it's appropriated. So I was hoping there would be some discussion on that, because the agenda is really open-ended as to economic provision. So anyway, I'll end on that note, and if the chairman or Madam Chair has any information on that, maybe in future hearings or something we can pursue. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Plaza.
Maybe ask Congressman Pino kasi kanina pa yata siya nagtataas ng kamay. So, nag-uusapan natin kanina yung tungkol doon sa terms and other issues pa bago tayo nagpalawig doon sa ibang topic.
Okay, before we continue to the last interpolator, Honorable Raul Daniel Manuel, we will acknowledge Honorable Tinio.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Chairman of the committee, Congressman Rufus. Actually, I just wanted to give a direct response to an earlier query of Rep. Daza regarding studies linking political dynasty specifically to the economy, effects on the economy. So I would just like to bring to the attention of the committee that there are in fact studies, and I would like to cite one, and this is not even call it a leftist or left-wing study, but this is published on the World Bank. It can be found on the World Bank site itself. So a study by a certain Siddharth George on political dynasties in India. We study the economic impacts of dynastic politics in India, and we document that political dynasties are widespread in India. 10% of MPs are children of former MPs, which is nearly 2,500 times higher than random chance would predict. So 10% daw. Actually, thinking about it, parang sa Pilipinas, baka hindi lang 10%. No? And to cut this short, the main findings are that it is not good for the economy. No, it says here, the key element is that both human capital and political capital are heritable, and inherited political capital allows descendants to persist in power even when they underperform.
May we request Honorable Tinio to submit that study?
Okay. So actually, yun lang po ang gusto nating i-input sa committee na sabi kanina kailangan na evidence-based ang discussion natin, and on one hand, maraming mga sinite na studies na nagsasabi na walang epekto ang political dynasty sa ekonomiya. Pero in fact, may mga pag-aaral, including sa India, na mas malapit pa siguro ang mas katulad ang kanilang lipunan sa lipunan natin kaysa for example sa Canada. No? At sinasabi nga dito na sa halip na makatulong sa pagpapaunlad o pagiging mas pantay ng kanilang lipunan, o magpakahusay ng kalidad ng pamumuno ng kanilang political leadership, ay nakakasama ito. No, and this is also a scientific and evidence-based study.
Thank you very much.
Thank you po.
We will proceed with the interpellation. Honorable Manuel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gusto ko lang din balikan yung topic tungkol sa political dynasties dahil nga bring up na rin siya dito sa ating committee. Gusto ko lang pong mag-respond dun sa point na may election naman. So kung bahagi man ng isang dynasty o hindi yung isang elected official, it shouldn't matter kasi tao naman yung bumoboto. However, Madam Chair, the fact na meron tayong mga resource person saying na may problema dun sa ating existing political system would necessitate na dapat silipin talaga natin yung ganong usapin. We can just put aside yung fact na yung dynasties, isa siyang forma ng concentration ng economic and political power sa ating bansa. Kaya hindi natin masasabi na level yung playing field na kahit sino yung tumakbo, magsasaka, manggagawa, anak ng negosyante, ay may pare-parehong access at pwedeng ma-elect at bahala na yung electorate kung sino yung kanilang ilalagay sa posisyon. That precisely underscores yung pangangailangan para lalo nating i-democratize yung governance sa ating bansa, Madam Chair. And when it comes to term limits, no, kaya din gusto ko ring i-remind actually yung ating mga resource persons to be more careful sa information na binabanggit nila, lalo na dito sa Kongreso. Kasi hindi lang Pilipinas tsaka Mexico yung merong term limits, in particular sa kanilang mga presidente. Madam Chair, allow me to cite South Korea, 1 year na 5-year, 5-year term, isang beses pwedeng magsilbi ang isang presidente. Honduras, 1 time 4-year term. Paraguay, 1 year 5-year term. Armenia, 1 time 7-year term. Mongolia, 1 time 6-year term. Malta, 1 year 5-year, 1 term 5 years. So point of order sa ating isang resource person, I'm not soliciting a response dahil napakinggan na rin po natin siya kanina pa nung umaga. Actually nga, mas dapat bigyan din natin yung time yung iba pa nating resource persons. Now, and then with that, on dynasties and term limits, now I'd like to go to specifics pagdating naman po sa ating proposals to amend the economic provisions in our Constitution. Actually, I would be interested to hear about the impacts of foreign ownership from our education stakeholders, in particular Kokopeya, but I think hindi nakadalo. But we have from the National Union of Students. I'd like to ask kung ano yung tingin dun sa isang nabanggit po nung nakaraang hearing na yung pag-allow natin na pumasok yung mga foreign education institutions would actually improve the quality of education dito sa ating bansa since there would be more competition sa education sector at mapapwersa yung ating mga schools na taasan pa yung kalidad ng kanilang pagtuturo. So I'd like to address the question to the resource person from NUSP.
Ms. Jandel, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the question of Honorable Manuel, I think there is no direct relationship if we increase foreign direct investments it will necessarily increase also the quality of education. As we cite Taiwan and South Korea, hindi naman ganoon taas yung foreign investment nila. Mababa nga actually, but they have a very good science and technology education. In fact, dito sa atin sa Pilipinas, tumaas yung foreign direct investment sa Pilipinas. Pero nakikita natin sa curriculum natin, if we allow na magiging vulnerable siya for 100% foreign ownership, yung curriculum of education natin mismo or yung government natin mismo yung magtutulak sa mga estudyante na mga ibang bansa kaysa sa yung ating mga siyentista ay maglingkod dito sa ating bansa. Putting also in record the efforts of the DOST Balik Scientist Program. I'm also a scientist, biologist, na medyo may kakulangan nga talaga sa siyentista sa Pilipinas. That's why if we want to push for quality education, we must add our budget for education, budget for science and research, increase the salary of our teachers, and instead of building more more foreign schools inside our country, we must focus on improving the buildings, the quality of infrastructures ng ating mga paaralan, lalo na may K-12 program tayo. And of course, with economic impacts, wala ding direct relationship na tumaas yung foreign direct investments, tumaas din yung enrollment ng mga estudyante. Kaya yun yung ating pinapangamba na baka mas lalong magmahal yung tuition dito sa Pilipinas. Citing that in the Philippines, we have 2,100 HEIs. 111 or 112 lamang doon yung state universities and colleges, 110 yung local universities and colleges, around that, and the rest are private institutions. If we allow foreign investments, kaya nga siguro nilagay sa constitution na at least 60% of the capital which is owned by Filipino citizens is to make sure na hindi lalagpas sa 40% yung ownership ng foreign investments sa Pilipinas. That's a safeguard sa magiging epekto kapag tumaas yung foreign direct investment sa education sector. And also with that's it. Sa ating that's why we in NUSP we are promoting for a nationalist, because if we allowed foreign direct investment, we will be reducing the nationalist nature of our education.
Yeah, thank you. Sunod naman for
Yes, please continue.
yes, Madam Chair. For Attorney Calleja, sa ating genuine assessment ngayon sa paano ba natin sinisikap na i-uphold ang 1987 Constitution. Mula nung na-adopt natin ang constitution na ito, how can we assess the different administrations as to how they really stuck to the essence of the 1987 Constitution?
Ganito na lang po. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Please
Congressman
proceed.
Manuel. Just to be fair for each administration, it would be just to say na bago naman po natin baguhin yung ating constitution, sinabi naman po natin hindi naman po perfecto rin at marami rin naman hong issues dyan, pero hindi pa natin siya na-fully implement. No administration since 1987 has fully implemented the Constitution. So sa atin po, bigyan po natin ng panahon para ma-fully implement yung ating Constitution, kasi nga sabi kanina, maraming provisions na as may provided by law na hindi pa rin naman nabibigyan ng full implementation. So if asked to grade one administration from the other, sa tingin ko hindi naman po nasa sa akin yon para mag-grade kung sino mas magaling or sino nag-implement. But I think it is fair to say that the Constitution, before we change, let us give it full implementation. Let us allow it to be fully implemented to the letter and to the spirit, na hindi pa naman ho siya sa tingin namin 100% implemented as of today. Salamat po.
Yeah, thank you. Now, to sum up my various points, Madam Chair, tingin po natin sa bansa natin ngayon with the various issues that we are facing, nailatag ng maraming ng ating resource persons yung kung ano-ano ba yung mga problemang kinakaharap. At para po masagot natin ang mga yon, then it would require, of course, various approaches. Kaya po, mas mainam na hindi tayo makulong doon sa talakayan lamang, na para masagot natin yung mga problema ng ating bansa, ano ba yung dapat nating baguhin dun sa konstitusyon, lalo na't nandyan yung napakaraming pwedeng gawin ng iba't ibang ahensya ng ating pamahalaan para tugunan yung pangangailangan ng ating mga kababayan. In fact, when we discuss economic provisions, I believe yung restrictions sa foreign ownership, hindi lang naman po siya yung tanging connected dun sa economic affairs ng ating bansa. Ang dami pa pong tingin ko connected din sa ating economy. Kaso lang, na zero in yung ating talakayan doon sa foreign ownership as if opening our country would be some sort of a magic pill doon sa iba't ibang mga problema natin ngayon. Ako po naniniwala ko na kahit pa hindi natin baguhin ang bahagi na yun ng ating constitution, ang Pilipinas po napakayaman niya, ang daming niyang natural resources, kaso lang hindi talaga mga Pilipino yung truly na nakakapamasa ng benefits ng lahat ng resources na meron tayo. Pwedeng halimbawa, may na-extract ng mga minerals, di ibang entity o ibang bansa yung nakakaganansya. Yung West Philippine Sea natin, TOT na nakakamkam mula sa atin. Kaya sa ngayon, no, after hearing the various points, still, Madam Chair, hindi po tayo kumbinsido na dapat ay baguhin yung economic provisions na ating constitution. And mas mainam po na gawin natin yung iba't ibang mga pwede pang approach, no? Lalo na halimbawa yung pag-adopt natin ng mga pro-people ng mga batas dito sa Kongreso. Yun muna, Madam Chair. Salamat.
Thank you. Thank you. That's our last interpolator. So, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, our Vice Chairperson of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments, the Honorable former Deputy Speaker, Congresswoman Divine Yu. Thank you very much for presiding over this afternoon session of this committee's hearings. Now, we'd like to also thank all our colleagues in Congress who were here this morning and this afternoon, and for attending and giving their views and asking questions. And of course, we'd like to thank our valued resource persons for your inputs this afternoon. Certainly, your positions will be included in the matrix so that this will help us finally decide on one, do we need to amend the Constitution now? Two, whether the mode will be Constituent Assembly or CONCON. There's another one, which is just a majority vote, to give the issue to the people on whether they want a constitutional convention or not. So, and then we are able then to see also what are the specific amendments. Our guests gave us also their views on certain specific amendments for those in favor of amendments, and also why there should be no amendments as presented by some resource person. In view of that, each resource person will receive a token from the chairman and the committee. You know, during the pandemic, instead of rewriting my 24 law books, I decided to write a song hit. So it's better than the my law books on law or the Constitution. So here, songs down memory lane. So each one of you will receive this. Happy singing to everyone. And this is my product of the pandemic. And so, you know, 20 years ago, I went to the US and got this Billboard Top 100. So, you know, the single sales, no? Sales of the singles, the Billboard since 1955, since, you know, Bill Haley and the Comets sang Dance Around the Clock. From the time, there was already a Billboard 100. So the top 100 in the US, I listened to each one from 1955 up to 1980. Because after 1980, only Daniel can understand that. Hip-hop and rap, medyo wala na kami dyan. So dito na kami sa mga standard. And so I realized that of the 100 songs for the US, top Billboard 160 became popular here because these are standard songs in love songs. Okay, so again, my thanks to all of you. You will have your book, and you will certainly be able to have a memory of this hearing. Thank you very much, and therefore the hearing for today is hereby adjourned. All right.